Firstly, I would like to thank the organisers of this conference as well as all of the other speakers. My name is Fionn Montell, and I'm currently studying for a DPhil in History of Art at the University of Oxford. This paper is entitled Salvage Economies, the Value of Silver and the Emergence of Photography in 19th Century Britain. Over the course of 1826, William Henry Fox Talbot, British inventor of the calotype, repeatedly invested in the Anglo-Mexican Mining Company through the private London bank of Hammersley & Co. On 10th of February of that year, he was sent the broker's note of purchase for 2 Anglo-Mexican mine shares costing £25 each. The price of shares subsequently went up to £57, and in October, Talbot bought 5 more. By the time he came to sell, he held 10 shares. The Anglo-Mexican Mining Company, which began operating in 1825, was one of a number of British enterprises which facilitated investment in Mexican silver mines. The company controlled a number of mines in Guanajuato in central Mexico, the area's mineral extraction having been presided over by the Spanish crown since 1554. Up until the 1850s, an estimated 80 to 85% of the world's silver came from the Americas, where it was mined and exported in line with colonial monopolistic trading principles. Under Spanish control, silver extracted from the territories spanning from El Rosario, Mexico in the north, to Sierra de Moreno, Chile in its southern reach, and transported to Europe by way of the flota, had provoked a fundamental shift in the global economic paradigm, the silver peso coming to function as the first worldwide currency. The colonial trade in silver was built on forced indigenous labor and the displacement of populations, as well as feeding into the practice of enslavement within the Atlantic Triangle, by which contraband silver was frequently used in the purchase of enslaved people. It was after 1839 and photography's public debut that more silver was discovered in New South Wales, followed by the Comstock Lode in Nevada and Silver Islet in Canada, altering supply chains. During the Spanish-Mexican War of Independence from 1808 to 1821, mining operations slowed down as the supply of mercury and tools dwindled. A contracted workforce led to the closure of numerous mines. In subsequent years, opportunistic investors, mainly from Britain, looked to stake their claim in the mineral-rich region, which was no longer under Spanish monopoly. Alexander Humboldt's political essay on the Kingdom of New Spain, published in English in 1811, popularized the idea of Mexico's lucrative mineral potential within the United Kingdom. Humboldt suggested that Guanajuato's reserves were far greater than those of the famous silver mining town of Potosí, now in Bolivia. This helped to encourage a flurry of speculation in London in the 1820s. The financial backing of these investors would supposedly bring the mines back to their pre-war level of function. However, the Anglo-Mexican Mining Company was already experiencing difficulties by 1826. The process of returning the mines to profitability proved to be more time-consuming and expensive than planned. Investors who had been led to expect substantial dividends in the short term were left disappointed. William Henry Fox Talbot sold all of his shares at a loss in 1829. It was 5 years later that Talbot began experimenting with sensitized papers using different combinations of sodium chloride and silver nitrate solution in order to produce images made up of areas of light and shade. There is no evidence to suggest that he made a conscious connection between his silver mining investments and the new silver-based image technology. Indeed, it is unsurprising that Talbot imagined these two activities as pertaining to altogether separate projects, given the broad negation of colonial sites of labour within Britain's domestic sphere. This computational disjuncture between the mining of silver overseas and its use as a photographic chemical speaks to the lacuna regarding photography's embeddedness in economies of resource extraction. Viewing Talbot's photography in the context of his mining investments, this paper sets out to examine the political economy of silver as imbricated in both photography and colonial mining practices in the 19th century. Talbot was certainly conscious of the centrality of silver to the chemical operation of photography. Both photogenic drawing and the calotype made use of paper sensitized with silver halides, which would change color on exposure to light. The light sensitivity of silver salts had been known about since at least the 17th century. In 1614, Angelo Sala had observed that silver nitrate changed color in sunlight. Heinrich Schulze had put this to use to form temporary images in 1727, and towards the end of the 18th century, Elizabeth Fulham and Thomas Wedgwood and Humphrey Davy had carried out experiments into the photosensitivity of silver on different surfaces. In 1844, in the Pencil of Nature, Talbot stated his familiarity with prior work on the matter, without revealing which, quote, chemical writers in particular he had drawn from. This lineage of experimentation with silver salts foregrounds the enduring availability of the metal as fundamental to the possibility of photography. As Talbot himself wrote, quote, "The whole possibility of the process depends on this, for if no such substance existed in rerum natura, the notion of thus copying objects would be nothing more than a scientific dream." The high price of silver in 19th century Britain was manufactured through the metal's role within the economic structure of the state. With the Coinage Act of 1816, England moved from the bimetallic standard to a gold standard regulated by token silver coinage, a monetary system which became renowned for its stability against counterfeit and depreciation. This depended on constant management, by which the silver put into circulation by the mint ought not to exceed the amount deemed necessary by the Treasury and the Bank of England. The value of silver was monitored through rigorous quality checks. Silver objects crafted in Britain had to be assayed and hallmarked according to standardized procedure to ensure they complied with high silver content requirements, sterling silver being set at 92.5%. The fiscal apparatus of the state closely regulated the economy of silver in Britain, the price of the metal functioning as an indicator of market prosperity. The fact that Talbot's photography depended on silver raised concerns due to its costly nature, as the photographic periodicals of the latter half of the century attest. The silver nitrate solution bought by photographers, produced as a byproduct of the silver refining process, was only marginally cheaper per ounce than silver itself, resulting in considerable outlay for amateur practitioners. This cost generated widespread efforts to develop processes in which silver could be replaced by other substances ranging from plant juices to carbon, most of which proved limited in tone or faded quickly. As Talbot wrote in an article published in the British Journal of Photography in 1864, quote, "The subject of printing without the use of silver occupies at present considerable attention." The valuable nature of even minuscule quantities of silver also motivated practitioners to develop means of minimizing wastage through measurement and salvage mechanisms. Several articles from the 1860s and 70s advertised methods of harvesting unused silver from chemical baths. In 1876, one writer suggested that, quote, "From one year to another, hundreds of pounds worth must find its way into the sewers. We should not be surprised to see issued a prospectus for the formation of a company to patent and practice a process for the recovery of silver from the sewers of our larger cities." Frequent references were also made to the use of argentometers to gauge the quantity of silver in silver nitrate solutions. Argentometers began to be made and sold by camera manufacturers and photographic chemists, such as J.T. Chapman in Manchester, and consisted of a glass tube with a specific gravity scale which used mercury to measure the weight of silver in troy grains per ounce. The troy ounce was used by pharmacists as well as the Royal Mint as a standard unit of measure for silver, as codified under the Weights and Measures Act of 1824. As such, the use of silver in photography meant that the new medium took on practices of regulation which had been formed within the fiscal state. Talbot made the calotype Articles of Silver on 3 shelves between 1835 and 1844 at his home in Laycock Abbey, Wiltshire. The image is one of a number in which he placed tableware, books, and in one instance, women's bonnets as part of assemblages, photographing them against a dark background. In this particular image, in an incidental act of metamateriality, Talbot laid out 15 items of polished silverware over shelves within a symmetrical arrangement. Like a textual inventory, the pictorial record of valuable objects created in articles of silver carries the conventions of an insurance document. Each cup and candlestick, isolated from the next, becomes a discrete unit of value. In the notable caption to Articles of China, as published in the Pencil of Nature, Talbot wrote, quote, "Should a thief afterwards purloin the treasures, if the mute testimony of the picture were to be produced against him in court, it would certainly be evidence of a novel kind." Quite apart from the question of indexicality, Talbot's supposition of the legal authority of his image tacitly rests on its reflection of his status as an established member of the landed class, expressing the knowledge that his testimony would be heard over that of the impoverished other in a court of law. This invocation of the insurance value of the photograph takes on new meaning when we consider the attempted robbery which took place at Laycock Abbey in 1851, in which a local individual was caught in the act of breaking and entering and sentenced to punishment by the treadwheel. "How fortunate," wrote Talbot's sister in a letter to him. "The thief was secured before he had time to make away with the plate." Had the Talbots been less lucky on that day, the legal value of the photograph Articles of Silver on 3 shelves may have been put to the test. As Alison Steelow has observed, silver inventories were vital records of a deceptively precarious asset, prefiguring acts of theft or liquidation which could easily become a reality. Anxiety to retain silver was common not only to European photographers and property owners. Those in charge of the process of mining silver on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean also created mechanisms for the salvage and retention of the metal. The Anglo-Mexican Mining Company, in which Talbot invested, owned the large Valenciana mine in Guanajuato, Mexico. This wage sheet from 1826, the same year that Talbot was investing in the company, is a useful source for considering the division of labor and treatment of material in the silver mine. Notably, in addition to the principal group of miners, pepenadoras, or waste pickers, were employed. This sublist can be distinguished from the rest in that it is primarily made up of the names of women, and as the record makes clear, they were paid much less than their male counterparts. The work of pepenadoras involved sorting through debris in order to separate useful ore from waste, using knowledge of the texture of different materials. In the Valenciana mine, these laborers made up around 20% of the workforce, and at its height, there were approximately 700 in one mine. This work involved close contact with toxic mercury, as well as constant inhalation of dust particles, exposing them to severe health risks. The low status afforded to these laborers within the gendered hierarchy of the workforce is reflected in their low pay, despite the crucial nature of the role. Pepenadoras were vital in preventing the wastage of precious silver, optimizing the mine's yields. As Macarena Gomez Barras has written, women and children working in the shadow of the mine have for centuries shaped the politics of labor in significant yet under-discussed ways. Insurgencies centered on the slag heap opening up, quote, "a discursive terrain of struggle in otherwise masculine radical narratives and geographies of gender inclusion." It is worth noting that at present, Fresnillo plc, the precious metals company which operates the world's largest primary silver mine in Zacatecas, operational since 1554, is an Anglo-Mexican company with its investment headquarters in London. Recent studies of women in the mining sector in Mexico have highlighted how an increase in subcontracting, enabled by flexible policies designed to attract foreign investors, has contributed to increased job instability, as well as creating barriers to collective action. The ongoing work of decolonial formations, such as anarcho-feminist group Mujeres Creando in Bolivia, highlights the transhistorical nature of extractive imperialism in the Americas, as well as resistance to it. The labor of the pepenadores in Mexican silver mines and European photographers' efforts to control and salvage photographic silver testify to the far-reaching effects of the high economic value of even small quantities of the metal. William Henry Fox Talbot's inventorial Articles of Silver on 3 Shelves is interwoven with the symbolic framework which had been constructed to prevent the loss of silver. A visual grammar of containment is doubled through the regimented treatment of space and the use of vessels as subject matter, creating a series of partitioning barriers which Talbot replicated across photographs of different materials. Within Talbot's typological enclosures, matter is given a taxonomic treatment linked to 19th century geology as an epistemology of mineral accumulation. The division of space and depiction of material in these photographs resonates with Catherine Yusuf's theorization of a, quote, white geology premised on the categorization of matter and bodies as extractable resources. The gaze of the speculative auditor can be perceived in both Talbot's photographs and his mining investments, which designated silver as a prospect to be capitalized on. Here, a political economic approach has foregrounded how the monetary construction of silver's value created practices of salvage with regard to its circulation. Mechanisms of wastage prevention, such as the argentometers and silver inventories used by Talbot and his circle, find their hidden correlative in the work of the pepenadores, saving silver from mine tailings. The job of these laborers is one example of what Natasha Eaton describes as, quote, the informal economy of waste imperialism, the invisible work which underpins commodity fetishism. Going forwards, looking to the generative resistance from within overlapping spheres of feminism, collectivism, and indigeneity with regard to silver mining reorients the task of reading photography against the grain. Approaching the emergence of photography through its material basis demonstrates the function of the medium as both a product and producer of resource imperialism. This task of intervention requires overcoming the artificial separation between Talbot's engagements with silver and the labor practices which brought it into his possession. Thank you.